First Samuel chapter 1. We're going to start in verse 20 there. Now last week we looked at Hannah and looked at the insensitive people in her life. She had a rival, which was her husband's other wife, who mocked her all the time and made fun of her and reminded her that Hannah could not have children. So that woman was insensitive. Then we looked at her husband was insensitive because he thought that he should make her happy, that she didn't need children, that she should revolve her world around him. And then we looked at that the priest was insensitive to her needs. And so today we're going to be looking at the vow that she made to God. She told God, as we looked last week, she said, if you'll give me a child, if you'll let me have a child, I will give you that child. That child will be yours. I will, as we look in the text, she says, I'm going to lend it to you. I'm going to give it to you for your glory and your honor. Now, look with me, 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 20. And so it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, because I asked for him from the Lord. She called him Samuel because she asked of him from the Lord. Now, ladies, tonight, you're sitting there watching the TV. I want you to lean over to your husband and whisper in his ear, you're my Samuel. Now, Tammy, you can't do that because your man's not here today, so he's going to be going, who's Samuel? Because I promise you, and I believe that the man sitting next to you is one you've been praying for God to have. That God gave you that man. That you prayed for that person to be in your life. That one who would be there for you. That one who would supply your needs, who would help you and who would strengthen you and who would encourage you. That person that you longed for to spend your life with. So you lean over to his ear and you go, you're my Samuel. And guys, you do that to your spouse too. You might have to say, you're my Sammy. But you get the point, right? That home you live in, you can say, this is my Samuel. I prayed for this. I asked God for this, and God gave it to me. You might say that about your car. This week I called, or this couple of weeks I've been calling mine Betsy. You know, come on Betsy, make it home. And I'm going to change it to Samuel. Because I prayed for that truck. And God gave it. You see where I'm going with this? You may look at your kids and say, this is my Samuel. That I prayed that God would give me children, and he gave me children. You may say that about your grandchildren. I prayed that God would give me grandchildren, and God gave me grandchildren. Literally, Samuel means that God heard my prayer. See, a lot of things in our life we take for granted. We forget that God answered that prayer. We forget that God was intervened in our life and said, you know what? I'm going to give you what you're asking for. Sometimes we just take for granted that God has given us all these blessings. And today I want you to be reminded that all those things in your life that God has given you, and you should be thankful. Amen. Look at verse 21 through 28. Now the man Machina and all his house went up to offer to the Lord their yearly sacrifice as vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, not until the child is weaned, then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. So Machina, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him, only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and skins of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. And she said, "O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord." So they worship the Lord there. Now can you imagine? I looked up last night because I didn't remember when you begin to wean a child. And there's another little verse. I don't want to remember when you wean a child. I don't want to have children. I don't want to start all over, okay? Just tell the team of that. Now here's the deal. It was saying that sometimes you begin to wean a child at 1 year old. Up to 3 years old, and I guess you can go over. But I thought, man, that young. Can you imagine what it would be like to leave that little child at that age with someone else? I mean, I can't even. Tyler is, I think, 18 months. Is that right?
20.
Huh? 20? I can't even imagine leaving. I mean, he's just now starting to do cute things, right? And so can you imagine having to leave that child, and I don't care how good, I mean, they're taking it to the house of the Lord. I don't care how good somebody is to your child, how much they may love that child. It's hard to leave that child with somebody that ain't you, right? You see, a lot of times we take characters in the Bible, we read about them, and we make them plastic. We don't think about what they're going through. We don't think about the thoughts and the pain and what they're dealing with. So today I want Hannah to become very real to you. I want you to understand that how hard this must have been. To take your child, the child that you've been praying for, the child that you've been longing for, the child that you've been asking God for, the one that you've been dreaming about, to take that child and place that child into somebody else's responsibility, somebody else's arms. I mean, 1 to 3 years old. I mean, when they're 13, 14, yes, drop that kid off. Yes, I would do it in a heartbeat. But when they're that young, can you imagine how hard that must have been? How tough that must have been? And oh my gosh, how serious she was about her vow. How serious this woman was about the commitment that she made. She had stood there, her heart was breaking, she was crying unto God, and she said, "You know what, God, if you'll give me this, I will give you him." And then she went through with it. Now, y'all, that was day by day commitment. Because every time she held it, every time she put it to her breast, she knew that at some point she was going to turn that child over to somebody else. Every time she stroked its hair, every time it touched her, every time it looked at her, every time it smiled at her, she knew that she was going to take that child and place it with somebody else. That's commitment. And it was hard. You can't tell me it wasn't hard. You can't tell me that she had no feelings. I don't believe that. But she went through it, John. Oh, that we'd be that serious to God. Oh, that we would be that serious to God. That we'd be that committed. That we would be that dedicated. That we wouldn't back off the promises we made. You see, that's what happens a lot of times. We make commitments to God and they get hard, they get difficult, it doesn't get any easier, and we begin to back off. We don't read our Bible as much as we did. We don't go to Sunday school like we did. We don't go to church like we did. We don't witness like we did. We don't pray like we did because it got too tough. This woman didn't back off. She didn't back off. She gave her child to God. Now look with me in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 18. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 18. Verse 18, we're starting there. It says, "But Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year, when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli would bless Lakina and his wife and say, 'The Lord gave you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord.' Then they would go to their own home. Then the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord." Now, she had been barren for a long time. God blesses her with Samuel, and then she gives Samuel to God, and then God blesses her again abundantly. What does that tell us? You can never outgive God. You can never do it. You can never outgive God. I'll tell you, I've been around people, it makes me uncomfortable when you hear people in church and they go, "Well, we only have this amount of money in the church and we can't use it." Well, God gave it to you in the first place, and He sure can replace it. And if you'll do His honor and His glory, He'll replace it with more. Now, here it says, even as a child, he was ministering. There is no age limit for God to use somebody. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful that there's no age limit? God can use anybody at any time, at any stage of life. And I am so thankful for that. So don't ever say to someone or say something about someone, "Oh, they're too young." No, they're not. They're never too young to start serving the Lord. Never. I mean, from the time they're born, you should be telling them about Jesus, singing to them about Jesus, letting them hear about Jesus. And let me tell you what, you're never too old. Don't ever say, "Oh, I'm too old to serve the Lord." No, don't ever say that. I just heard about a woman in her 70s who went to the mission field for the very first time. She had raised her family. She had raised her grandchildren. And when they got grown and got in college, she said, "You know what? God's always called me to the mission field." And the preacher said, well, you know, what you've been doing is a mission field. She said, I know that, but there's something else. She went on the mission field, and when she was 90 years old, John, her and her sister started an orphanage. Ooh. Now, don't ever say that there's an age limit for God to use you, because that's just not true. Now look with me there. It says, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year. And what does that tell us? It tells us that even though Samuel is in the house of God, and Samuel is doing the work of God, because we know that, because we just read that, she didn't forget about her son. She took care of a need that he had. He needed a robe. And year by year, she'd take him a new robe. You see, there's a lot of people who drop their kids off at church. There's a lot of people who drop their kids off in Sunday school or vacation Bible school. And they forget about, maybe not them, but they forget about their spiritual needs. They say, well, that's what the Sunday school teacher's for. That's what the preacher's for. That's what the vacation Bible school worker's for. Just let them handle the spiritual needs. No, let me tell you what. No matter if you drop them off in Sunday school or vacation Bible school or church, you need to pray for that child. You need to pray for that Sunday school teacher. You need to pray for that preacher. You need to pray for that vacation Bible school worker. You need to be praying for the spiritual life of that child. You never forgot about a child. Then look with me there. She never forgot about a child, because let me tell you what, and this is what happens to a lot of people, and then they get shocked. But just because your kids were raised up in church, don't mean they know the Lord. Because if we had read a little bit further, you'd understand that Eli, who was the priest, his boys were raised up in church, and they were bad. Quite simply, I'm just going to put it this way, they took things that didn't belong to them. So whether your kid's in church, no, I don't mean just little kids, I mean your grown kids or your grandkids. Just because they're not in church or because they're not in church, you pray for them. You pray for them. You pray that God would put people around them, that God would, that those people who impact their life, it might be a preacher, it might be a Sunday school teacher, it might be a vacation Bible school worker, it might be a coach, it might be a teacher, it might be somebody, that God would place those people in their life to minister to them. Now, y'all, this woman gave the biggest sacrifice that she could. There's things in your life that you've given to God. You know, areas. Things of yourself. And when you said them, you meant them. But something's happened. It got hard, didn't it? It got daily. It might even got monotonous. And you backed off. Today's the day when you go, you know what? I want to make that recommitment. I want to surrender that back to God. God had that area for a while, but He doesn't have it anymore. And I need to make that commitment again. again. I need to rededicate my life. I need to get right with God. I need for Him to take control of my life. I need Him to be over my life, and I want to give that back to Him fully. I surrender all to Him. That's what she was willing to do. And God blessed her for it. And you can't tell me that you can sit here today and not know that God's blessed you. Even though you've backed out, even though you went back a ways, God still blessed you, right? That's awesome.